By the time 2 Kings was written in the Old Testament, that Old Testament book that you read every day. Oh, not every day. Am I not on? I think I'm on. Am I? Yeah. By the time 2 Kings is written, there's been a division. There was a split, as maybe some of you know. And there was the southern kingdom of Judah and the northern kingdom of Israel. Judah had Jerusalem as its capital, and Israel had Samaria as its capital. Now we have two nations instead of one. That happened in 722. And in 2 Kings chapter 6, there's one story there that has been, for me, one of my favorite stories in all the Bible. The story goes like this. The kingdom of Aram, which is to the east of Judah, Israel, roughly where Syria is today. It's almost identical to Syria, the kingdom of Aram. The kingdom of Aram and Israel were at war with each other. Some things never change. You have people fighting all the time. The king of Aram had a problem. And this was his problem. Every time he sent one of his troops, every time he sent his army to a certain place to attack Israel, they were ready for him at exactly the very place where he would send his soldiers. Israel was ready. There was no surprise at all. They were ready to go, ready to defend. And the king of Aram finally called in his advisors and he said, "Where's the leak? They seem to know exactly what we're doing all the time. Where's the leak?" And his advisors said to him, "There are no leaks. There's a prophet in Israel by the name of Elisha. And he knows everything. He even knows what you say in your bedchamber." Well, that's gilding the lily. I mean, really, how could he know what the king says in his bedchamber? But anyway, that's what they told the king. And so the king of Aram said, "Where is he?" And so spies were sent out, and it was discovered where Elisha was. And they came back and they said, "Elisha is in Dothan." And so the king sent his best troops, his elite troops, to Dothan. And the next morning, or one morning soon after that, Elisha's servant woke up, walked out of the house, and looked around, and the whole town was surrounded by the armies of the king of Aram. And he rushed back into the house and he told the prophet, the man of God, Elisha, "Oh my Lord, what are we going to do?" And Elisha said, "Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. There's more of us than there is of them." Well, the servant could count. More of us than there is of them. 1, 2, 20, 40, 60, 80. And so Elisha prayed. And his prayer went like this: "Oh Lord, open his eyes." And when the servant opened his eyes, he saw that on the hills surrounding the city were horses and chariots of fire. Chariots of fire. He couldn't see them, but now he sees God's mighty presence. all around. So at this point, the armies of the king of Aram began to make their charge against Elisha. And Elisha prays a second time. And this time he prays, and all of the army, every one of them, went blind. Imagine that. A blind army. And at this point, Elisha leads them. I'll show you where you need to go, he says. And he leads this blind army into the capital city of Samaria, where now they are within the king's own city of protection. And he prays again, and their eyes are open. And there they are, captured, without a shot, without an arrow. Well, the king of Aram, the king of Israel, was delighted. And he looks at the prophet Elisha. He knew who was in charge of the situation, the king looking to the prophet. He looks at Elisha and he says, "Shall I kill them?" He asked it a second time. "Shall I kill them?" I don't know if that question was asked in hot anger or cold anger. There are two faces of anger, you know. There's hot and there's cold. It can be either way. I saw a movie not long ago on television called The Conspiracy. It's been around a few years. Maybe some of you have seen it. It takes place in January of 1942. And the whole movie practically is in one room where about 17 Nazi officials of Germany are sitting around the table. This is a true story because the transcripts of this meeting, January 1942, were meant to be destroyed before the war was over, but one was not destroyed, and it was discovered. And so the conversation of Adolf Eichmann and all of these Nazi leaders around this table is a true rendition of actually what they were talking about. The purpose of the meeting was that some of these people still needed to be convinced of the final solution. And so the discussion surrounded the final solution that they were going to put in place. It's an amazing movie. Oh, there's a little bit of emotion there and some discussion and maybe some questioning of. But basically, it's an amazing movie. These 17 men sitting around this table, coldly talking about destroying 6 million people, women, children, boys, girls, men. It's an amazing rendition of cold, calculating anger. It can be hot, it can be cold. So the king, well, I don't know if it was hot, I don't know if it was cold, he says to Elisha, "Shall I kill them?" And Elisha says, "Oh, no. No. Bring out the food." That must have been a moment of disorientation. What? Bring out the food. And it says that they had a feast. All the soldiers, all the people gathered around tables. No, not just a feast. I like this. It says they had a great feast. I mean, they had a party, and there was food and meat and potatoes and corn and rice and vegetables and drink. Can you imagine this party they must have had? Now, when soldiers and men get together like that, you know, they probably were singing their songs to each other after a few drinks. And they were probably telling jokes about their wives or their mistresses or their sweethearts. And I can just imagine, I would have loved to have been there. Here they are around the tables. and they're eating and drinking and laughing and singing together. They had a great feast. And at the end of the story, it says that the armies of Aram were sent home. And the last verse of the story goes like this. So the bands, the armies, so the bands of Aram stopped raiding Israel's territory. They feasted together and never came back to fight again. We read today that great text then from the New Testament. In your sin, in your anger, do not sin. Or be angry, but do not sin. We read it from the New Testament book of Ephesians. I like that verse for a number of reasons. First of all, it says that we are going to be angry. I mean, it doesn't say don't ever be angry, right? It says in your anger, do not sin. Actually, anger is an essential part of life, isn't it? There are some things that we ought to be angry about. Anger has this purpose. It's like a fuel that energizes and causes us to rise up and to act, to right some injustice or to correct some wrong. I'm sure you followed the story this past week. South Florida, these children being shot. The grief and the pain of that community and those families, they're on our hearts this morning. And this should make us angry. Now, does it matter whether you're liberal or conservative? I mean, there are various approaches to this. One side wants to work for better mental health, and one side wants to work for better gun control. Doesn't matter what side you're on. We all need to be justly angry and to rise up to stop this. Our anger is a fuel, an energy that helps us to do that. So there's a good side of anger, but there's also a bad side of anger. The bad side of anger is not when we rise up to change an injustice or to right or wrong. The bad side of anger is when we rise up because our little fragile ego somehow has been hurt. Or our great plans for life somehow have been thwarted by someone, steps in front of our way so that we can't achieve what we want to do. And the problem then, the challenge for us at this point is always that we become like those that we oppose. That's always the danger of anger. Is in our anger fighting it, opposing it, when it is our own ego that's at stake. We become like our enemy. We become like that which we are against, the evil against us that we oppose. And that's always a deadly thing. Be angry, but do not sin. Or in your anger, sin not. It's interesting how Jesus lived this out, isn't it? So amazing. He never rolled over. He never played victim. He never failed to stand strong against evil and opposition. He was always strong. Even in his trial, you watch the trial of Jesus, and they ask questions of him in the trial, and he doesn't even answer, as if to say, I'm not going to give you an answer. You're not in charge here. You're not the boss. I'm not going to say a word. He stands strong always against evil. Never rolls over. Never capitulates to it. Never lets it get the best of him. And on the other hand, he never calls the angels down from heaven either, does he? With flaming swords to wipe out his enemies and his opposition. He always speaks the truth. That's the first thing we do to make anger redemptive. Jesus always spoke the truth. And he went to the cross, and he engaged the anger, the enemy, the evil in the world that was against him. There's a New Testament word for that. It's on the front of your bulletin. And it's called meekness. Now, meekness is not weakness. That's how we use it. That's how we employ that word in our English language. But in the Bible, meekness is never weakness. Meekness is power under control. And it's often thought as thinking of a horse. That's the reference in many instances. Imagine a horse, such a strong animal. You stand next to the horse, and the muscles and the power of a horse. It's just beautiful, amazing thing to see. And we say that when a horse is under guidance, control, all of this power under control, we say that is a meek horse. Our anger under control is meekness, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing to let our anger be under control, because then God leads, God directs. We're under God's direction in what we do to help prevent or help rescue or whatever it is that we need to do to rise up in anger to change. That's a good thing. And the other side, of course, when we are led by our ego and our own needs and our own program, when we let our anger become retribution, revenge, punishment. When we do that, we always mess up. We always mess up. The New Testament talks about God's wrath. We think of the Old Testament as being wrathful God. No, God's wrath is revealed in the New Testament as well. But God's wrath is always perfect. We never have to worry about God's wrath ever being out of bounds. God's wrath is always redemptive. God's wrath is always in order for a new thing to come about. And our wrath always messes up. Always. Always. in your anger do not sin. So what do? We give our anger and the person that we're angry toward to God. We go in prayer and we pray something like this. God, you know how I feel, and I can't change that. I am so angry. But I want to give you this person, this situation, because I know that you will take care of whatever needs to be taken care of. If punishment needs to be taken care of, if wrath needs to be a part of it, if guidance, whatever is needed, I know that you will do it and that you will do it perfectly. I give you this person, this situation. It's yours. Take it. Do with it as you will. And there's release from that. Love your enemy. That's not an elective, folks. That's not one of these verses that you can say, well, I think I'll take this one, but not, no. If we are not in a process of loving our enemy, then we haven't even begun to walk in the way of Christ, the way of the cross, in the way of new life. We give all of it to God, and we step back. Jesus even prayed for his enemy who put him on the cross. And if he can do that, so can we. I've read many times the words of Martin Luther King in my devotional life. I think the sermon he was preaching was on Christmas Eve, 1967, his last Christmas Eve. And I come back to these on occasion. They put me back on track. I need to be put back on track just like you do. And in that sermon in 1967, that Christmas Eve, he said to that church in Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, he preached, hate is too great a burden to bear. Somehow we must be able to stand up before our most bitter opponents and say, we shall match your capacity to inflict suffering by our capacity to endure suffering. We will meet your physical force with soul force. Do to us what you will, and we will still love you. So throw us in jail, we will still love you. Bomb our homes and threaten our children. And as difficult as it is, we will still love you. Send your hooded perpetrators of violence into our communities at the midnight hour and drag us out on some wayside road and leave us half dead as you beat us. And we will still love you. Send your propaganda agents around the country and make it appear that we are not fit culturally and otherwise for integration, and we will still love you. But be assured, that we will wear you down by our capacity to suffer. And one day, we will win our freedom. We will not only win freedom for ourselves, we will so appeal to your heart and your conscience that we will win you in the process. And our victory will be a double victory. That's meekness, power under control. That's strength. That's courage. That's determination. That's the way Christ has in mind for us to live in this world.
Mommy, you like this one?
Meek, ready, willing to live a new life. So different from all other life around us. This is special. Don't let anybody outlove you, okay? Don't let any religion outlove you. Don't let anything stop you. Bring a champion for Christ. Meek, ready, willing, courageous. Every time I read those words, it calls me back. And I say quietly in my heart, Amen, God. Help me to do that. Amen. The word having been proclaimed, we join together in song this week.